الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذ تستغيثون ربكم فاستجاب لكم أني ممدكم بألف من الملائكة مردفين سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت وسلمت وباركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. Brothers and sisters and youth and young friends, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I hope inshallah this message, Friday message, finds you well and you are inshallah charged with iman and faith, and the blessed month of Ramadan is going smooth, and inshallah you are benefiting from its fruits. Can we believe that it's already the 15th of Ramadan and we're halfway there? Normally what happens in the very beginning of Ramadan, there's a lot of anticipation, and rightfully so, and there's a lot of energy as well, and commitment and dedication. But as the week into Ramadan passes, thereafter sometimes that momentum is maybe not as strong as it was initially in Ramadan, and then normally again it will pick up in the last 10 nights. But let us inshallah keep in mind and take advantage of every moment and every day and every night of this blessed month of Ramadan, and let it not slip away without seizing the opportunities and the beautiful moments for dua and the recitation of Quran and expression of our akhlaq and our ibadat and our thirst and taking advantage of this beautiful month which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as is the often repeated verse in the month of Ramadan, mentions that, O believers, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. That fasting has been prescribed upon those who came before you in order to gain, fasting has been prescribed upon you just as it has been prescribed upon those who came before you, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, in order that you gain taqwa. And we looked at that in the first Friday message in the month of Ramadan, of how the fasting person expresses various ways of that consciousness of Allah Ta'ala, and it helps the fasting person grow in that consciousness to move beyond refraining from food and drink, but also the fasting of the limbs, and ultimately also the ideal of fasting of the heart as well. The second objective we looked at last week in the Friday message was the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is also one of the objectives behind the month of Ramadan. Of course, forgiveness can always be sought and asked from Allah at all times throughout all 11 months. But in this beautiful month of Ramadan, Allah Ta'ala gives special opportunities, and there's a special forgiveness which is there, and it's easy, and it's made easy for those inshallah who just make a little effort of repenting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and treating the month of Ramadan in a special manner. And this is indicated and reflected that Allah Ta'ala wants good from us. For the Prophet ﷺ has said that when the month of Ramadan enters, in a hadith of Bukhari, when the month of Ramadan enters, فُتِحَتْ أَبْوَابُ الْجَنَّةِ, the doors of Jannah, they are made to a wide open. They are flung wide open. وَغُلِّقَتْ أَبْوَابُ جَهَنَّمْ, and the doors of Jahannam, they are locked tight. وَسُلْسِلَةِ الشَّيَاطِينَ, and the shayateen as well, they are also chained. So the doors of Jannah open in a literal sense, and the schedule of Ramadan and that which Allah Ta'ala has prescribed of the fasting and the qiyam in the night of the Salat al-Taraweeh and Tahajjud Salah, the opportunities with suhoor and etc. These are all things which Allah Ta'ala has made as a Ramadan schedule, and the one who yearns to fit their schedule according to the month of Ramadan, then inshallah ta'ala there is no other way but to be forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the doors of Jannah are closed and locked, and the pathway which leads to Jahannam in the month of Ramadan, the schedule is such that inshallah it will prevent a person from doing those things which will displease Allah Ta'ala, and thereby not committing sins, not leading to Allah's displeasure, and also be protected from Jahannam. And as a favor and a bounty, Allah Ta'ala as well has chained the shayateen, that they would not be able to insinuate, they will not be able to misguide and whisper things that they would normally do outside the month of Ramadan, or at least not at that level. And that becomes a helpful way of how a person can draw nearer to Allah Ta'ala and not have his enemy, the shaitan, use ways of how he would dissuade him from Allah Ta'ala's command. What would be interesting to note while we're in these middle 10 days, and sometimes there's, like we mentioned in the beginning, there's a fade of energy, or there what some would call the Ramadan dip. But we should also reflect and understand that in the Seerah, there was immense sacrifice which was made in the second year of Hijrah. In the second year of Hijrah, the Prophet ﷺ, when he came to Medina in his second year and he settled there, or started to become more settled there, then the month of Ramadan was also prescribed in the second year. And in that very month of Ramadan, in the second year, which was prescribed, the incident or the battle of Badr had taken place. Now, this was not something which was planned. This was not something which was planned prior to this incident, this waqiyah of Badr. And it's interesting is that because we also are finding ourselves, if we were to ask last Ramadan, or even the last few months, or prior to even in the beginning of this Gregorian year of 2020, that our Ramadan will be like this. There will be public health safety measures in place, and there will be no access for the public to come to the masajid. This is something that we would never have conceived. Similarly, the Prophet ﷺ and this incident in the Seerah and the companions had never conceived that Badr would have taken place. Their intention initially was that that caravan which was moving between Syria and Mecca, and at that time Abu Sufyan was the leader, he wasn't Muslim as of yet. The Prophet ﷺ had intelligence and had received news that they were moving from Syria to Mecca, and they had intended just to intercept the caravan. For in Mecca, the companions, the muhajirun, they were driven out of their homes and their wealth, and unjustly and unfairly. And they also wanted to settle in Medina and gain strength to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, gain financial stability, gain some type of equilibrium that they would be able to carry on with their lives now. And this was an opportunity that the Prophet ﷺ had sought to show that there is a presence in Medina of Muslims, and also the goods, intercepting these goods of the caravan which was coming from Syria to Mecca. And Abu Sufyan had also received information that this was the intention of the Muslims in Medina, of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, and therefore he had dispatched certain individuals to Mecca of the intentions. And Abu Jahl at that time, he with an army of 1,000 strong, armed to their teeth, had made their way then to Badr, which is so many miles outside Medina. And the Prophet ﷺ there at that time as well was making mashwara with the companions as to what they should do. And the Muhajirun, they were there and they had indicated and expressed that they were going to support the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ had asked once or twice, and finally amongst the Ansar, they realized that the Prophet ﷺ is asking them, because this was not part of necessarily their pact. The Ansar would allow the Prophet ﷺ or welcome the Prophet ﷺ to their city, and they would protect the Prophet ﷺ. But in terms of actual warfare, this was not part of the pact or the agreement initially. But they also being those who showed allegiance to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ, they understood that this was what the Prophet ﷺ was getting at, and immediately showed their obedience and their allegiance that whatever it takes to defend Islam and the Prophet ﷺ, even if it means our first full month of fasting, the month of Ramadan, then we are going to sami'na wa ata'na, we have listened and we have obeyed. And they made their way the companions consisting of the Muhajirun and the Ansar to Badr. And look at the numbers. The opposition on the one hand, 1,000 strong, armed to their teeth. They have conveyance, they have weaponry, etc. The Prophet ﷺ and his companions, there are only 313 companions with the Prophet ﷺ. So there's 3 times more, and very ill-equipped. And the Prophet ﷺ in this state, he is making dua for his companions, and he says, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he had left for Badr in the number of 315 companions, then the Prophet ﷺ is making dua, Allahumma innam hufatan fahmilhum. Oh Allah, they are barefoot. In other words, they are walking, they don't have a ride, they don't have animals to ride on, so give them conveyance to ride on. Allahumma innahum uratun faksuhum. Oh Allah, they are barely clothed, give them clothing. This is their situation and their state of poverty that they were in. Allahumma innahum jiya'un. It's the month of Ramadan, and on top of that, they're jiya' as well. They are people who are hungry. فَأَشْبِعْهُمْ. So give them and saturate their hunger. فَفَتَحَ اللَّهُ لَهُ يَوْمَ بَدْرٍ. And through this beautiful dua and the success which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given to the believers on Badr, they had returned from there, and every single one of them either had 1 or 2 camels. وَاقْتَسَوْا. And they also had clothing, sufficient clothing for themselves. وَشَبِعُوا. And also, alhamdulillah, they had provision and rizq to also fulfill their hunger as well. So when the Prophet ﷺ had reached Badr, now there's a difference of opinion amongst the scholars of Seerah, of history, as to when was this. Some say 12, some say 17, some say 19. Some of our scholars have reconciled between all 3 opinions, saying that they left Medina on the 12th. They left Medina on the 12th, and then thereafter they reached there on the 17th, and only on the 19th did the battle of Badr cease. Be it as it may be, the Prophet ﷺ, when he reached Badr and he saw the opposition and the number of the opposition, and seeing how well equipped that they were, then he ﷺ, he turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So sometimes, we are also living at a time where we have many uncertainties as well. It is the beautiful month of Ramadan. We're also in that middle ashar, that ashar of which, or the first in the second year of Hijrah, the Prophet ﷺ and his companions, when we compare ourselves to that situation, then we will find ourselves, inshallah, most of us in a much better situation in terms of financial security, in terms of physical well-being, in terms of security, that compared to the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. So therefore, we should be ever thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this regard. Secondly, what did the Prophet ﷺ do when he was faced with this difficulty? We are also, rightfully so, in our own personal and collective capacities are being challenged at this time. And what we learned from the Prophet ﷺ is that he turned to Allah Ta'ala in humility. He turned and he showed his neediness to him subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, we also should show our neediness, place our neediness and our poverty and our humility to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to gain us victory, to deliver us from our situation. Just as the Prophet ﷺ had made dua to Allah Ta'ala to deliver him and the companions, and not only him and the companions, for it was something even greater than that, and that was the existence and the preservation of Islam being preserved at that time. And this could be easily seen, and what I mean is from the dua of the Prophet ﷺ on that day, that the Prophet ﷺ, that he فَاسْتَقْبَلَ النَّبِي صَلَّى اللَّهُ الْقِبْلَةِ, he turned to Allah Ta'ala by facing the Qibla, which is a etiquette of dua. ثُمَّ مَدَّ يَدَيْهِ, and he then he spread his hands in dua, he raised his hands in dua. فَجَعَلَ يَهْتِفُ بِرَبِّهِ, and he started to show his humility, his humbleness to Allah Ta'ala, and he started to make this dua. Allahumma anjiz li ma wa'adtani. Oh Allah, fulfill that which you have promised me in terms of the deen of Islam being raised and being spread throughout the corners of this world, and victory being given to the believers. Allahumma ati ma wa'adtani. Oh Allah, give me that which you have promised me. Allahumma in tuhlik hadhihi al-isaba min ahli al-Islam la tu'bad fil ardi. Oh Allah, if this group of companions of the Muslims who follow the deen of Islam, if they are destroyed on this day, la tu'bad fil ard, you will never be worshipped on this earth, because this belief will prevail. فَمَا زَالَ يَهْتِفُ بِرَبِّهِ. And the Prophet ﷺ continued to beg and to ask and show his humility to Allah Ta'ala. مَادًّا يَدَيْهِ مُسْتَقْبِلَ الْقِبْلَةِ, spreading his hands and facing the Qibla. حَتَّى سَقَطَ رِضَاءَهُ عَنْ مَنْكِبَيْهِ. And his shawl, which was on his head, it had fallen onto his shoulders. And Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu took the shawl and placed it again upon the head of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فَأَلْقَاهُ عَلَى مَنْكَبَيْهِ. He spread it over his shoulders, and then he also grabbed and hugged the Prophet ﷺ from behind, and he said, Ya Nabi Allah, O Messenger of Allah, kafaka munashadatuk. Your dua is sufficient. Your dua which you're making to your Rabb is sufficient. فَإِنَّهُ سَيَنْجِزُ لَكَ مَا وَعَدَكَ. Because indeed and most certainly, He will fulfill that which He has promised you. From here we can deduct the point that, Nabi Allah, the Prophet ﷺ, was ever concerned, and he's turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And perhaps Sayyidina Abu Bakr had at some point or another had observed this humility and the effect that it was having on the Prophet ﷺ, so much so that he comes and he comforts and solaces the Prophet ﷺ. And this was beautiful of those who were around the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, that although he was who he was, the beloved and of Allah Ta'ala, and he had completion and kamal in all the maqamatul sifatul deen, in all the stations of deen, of tawakkul, of sabr, of shukr. Yet we find that human interaction and that human connection of showing support morally, physically, this was so meaningful to the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ, and it had its amazing effects. And we find this in the Seerah, when the Prophet ﷺ as well, when he initially got the first revelation, which also happened to be on the 17th night of Ramadan, if I'm not mistaken, 17th or 19th, or maybe even the 21st. But 17 is what I recall, and Allah knows best, that this initial revelation of Iqra as well was also at that time. And this would have been when he initially also expressed this to Khadija radiallahu anha, and she had explained and she had given him comfort at that time. And thereafter in Badr, Sayyidina Abu Bakr is also giving comfort to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So therefore at this time, this pandemic that we are also going through as well, and this condition is sometimes not an easy condition. So we need our collective support. And if you can also reach out to others in your home, and others in comforting them and giving them solace and giving them, inshallah, glad tidings that things are going to move things are going to improve, then this will inshallah be something which will be meaningful to those who you reach out to. And Allah Ta'ala then revealed the verse, إِذْ تَسْتَغِيثُونَ رَبَّكُمْ. Remember when you ask help of your Lord, فَاسْتَجَابَ لَكُمْ. And Allah Ta'ala answered your dua, أَنِّي مُمِدُّكُمْ بِأَلْفٍ مِّنَ الْمَلَائِكَةِ, by saying that I will help you. Indeed, I will reinforce you with 1,000 from the angels. مَنَ الْمَلَائِكَ مُرْدِفِينَ, following one another. And the angels came on that day of Badr, and they helped and assisted the believers. And the believers had defended themselves, and fairness and justice prevailed, and oppression and wrongdoing that had that failed of the mushrikun and the Quraysh on that day, and the believers, they had left Badr on that day in a very successful way. So therefore, few lessons. The first one is that the month of Ramadan, yes, it is the month of fasting, and the objective behind the month of Ramadan is in order for us to gain taqwa and to gain maghfirah. But there's also a third lesson which we are trying to convey today, and that is that fasting has been prescribed upon you, just as it has been prescribed upon those who came before you. See, we as human beings, we come from a history. There's of course a human history, and there's an Islamic tradition and legacy which we come from as well. And we learn from the Seerah, starting from the Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, in the second year of Hijrah, the first time Ramadan was prescribed, that the Battle of Badr had taken place. And that Battle of Badr which had taken place was so severe that even because of that situation, Islamically from Allah Ta'ala's side as well, there was a provision that if they wanted to fast or not to fast. There are some reports say that some of the companions fasted, some of the companions did not fast. And those who intended not to fast is because they would gain strength to defend themselves, to defend Islam, to stand up for fairness and for justice. But the point was that we are taking lessons from communities who fasted before us. And this is a beautiful lesson in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, where we can gain inspiration in our Ramadan in general, and specifically in these middle 10 days, which sometimes that energy starts to fade, and we are now feeling maybe some of the effects which Ramadan was intended for, of tiredness, of fatigue. But this is part of the what now? This is part of the whole process of the purification, inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify us in a way which He is pleased with and He has intended, and give us everything, in fact, for that which He has intended this beautiful month of Ramadan for. We could also learn that although we were not witness to Badr, but this criterion, because Badr was also referred to Yawm al-Furqan, the day of the criterion, the day that truth prevailed and falsehood was abased. And this beautiful month of Ramadan, Allah Ta'ala makes reference to that it's the month of Ramadan wherein the Quran was revealed as a guidance for humanity and clear signs of guidance, wal Furqan, and also the Quran as well, which is connected to the month of Ramadan. This is also it is a criterion which deciphers or which differentiates from truth and falsehood. And Allah Ta'ala mentions, O believers, in tattaqullah, if we gain taqwa, if we're fasting this month of Ramadan and treating it in a way which was intended for, يَجْعَلْ لَكُمْ فُرْقَانًا, Allah Ta'ala will give us a furqan, وَيُكَفِّرْ عَنْكُمْ سَيِّئَاتِكُمْ, and will also expiate your sins, وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ, your major and your minor sins will be forgiven. وَاللَّهُ ذُو الْفَضْلِ الْعَظِيمِ, Allah Ta'ala is the possessor of great bounty. So this is the first lesson, learning from the seerah and those who came before us in terms of their sacrifices which they made. Secondly, the day of Badr was the day of Furqan, and we also have the Quran with us, which is that criterion to differentiate between truth and falsehood. And this month of Ramadan, the intention and the underlying reason is taqwa. And by a person expressing Allah consciousness, taqwa, he will also be granted a furqan, intuition, insight to see and differentiate between truth and falsehood, which is ever so needed in a time of fitna, of trials and temptations as we move closer to the Day of Judgment. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to see that and not allow the sins and the darkening of our hearts to soil that intuition and that vision to differentiate between truth and falsehood. We also learn and take lesson from this incident of the seerah, that of the humbleness and the dua, the yearning that the Prophet ﷺ had made, and the attentiveness of his heart to alleviate him from that condition. So we also similarly ask Allah Ta'ala to alleviate and deliver us from our individual and our communal and global crisis which we are facing all together. We also ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we learn that Allah Ta'ala does help, and the help comes in various ways. And sometimes there are certain situations and circumstances which come our way, and we might not understand the wisdom. But Allah Ta'ala has decreed a matter, and that matter is sometimes decreed to show and let truth prevail and let falsehood become abased. And this was done in the time of Badr because that wasn't planned. Similarly, our situation and this on which we're spending, it's very different and sometimes perhaps even unprecedented in our history that we know of in our lifetime, and those who are or even elder in our community. So this is something which is out of our control and something which is decreed, but it sometimes it allows truth to prevail and falsehood to be abased. And many of the Western countries and the Western hemisphere, and here locally as well, alhamdulillah, that we find that sometimes because of the noise, there's been a relaxation in the noise, what they would term as noise exemption. And we find that the adhan is being called out. And this is also something which is unprecedented, and we have never seen or never have observed prior to this. And it's an amazing thing that wherever the adhan reaches, then that will witness for the muaddin on the day of judgment. And it's also a call of da'wah, and it's also a call of reflection. And perhaps, inshallah, we are hopeful that it will be also a means of guidance and hidayah for all of mankind as well. So this is also something, one aspect of which is of khair, of goodness, which has come out. And there's that which we can understand and that which we have yet to comprehend, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed this matter. And whatever inshallah Allah decrees for the believer and the believers, there'll always be a wisdom and there's always goodness within it. And last but not least, Allah Ta'ala's help definitely comes, and it comes in different forms. And at Badr, it came in the form of angels, where they helped the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. And indeed, for all of time, Ala inna nasrallahi qareeb. Yes, there will be sometimes challenges, there will be sometimes difficulties, and a person might be even shaken to the core. But know, Ala inna nasrallahi qareeb, that Allah Ta'ala is aware of one's circumstance, and indeed the help of Allah Ta'ala is ever near. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive our shortcomings. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enshroud us with His mercy. May Allah Ta'ala grant us forgiveness and taqwa in everything which He had intended with the month of Ramadan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant all the prophets, and specifically the Prophet ﷺ, the greatest of ajr, the greatest of rewards, and his companions, radiyallahu anhum, and all those who have come of this ummah, who have come unto this time, all those who have passed away from our family members, from our parents. May Allah Ta'ala grant them Jannatul Firdaus, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give shifa to all those who are sick, and may Allah Ta'ala grant relief to all those who are in debt, and may Allah Ta'ala grant relief and solutions to all those who are facing various crises in whatever form it may be. May Allah Ta'ala grant to everyone shifa. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you and your families and the community and the ummah and all of mankind. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to live on iman and to pass away on iman. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the good that the Prophet ﷺ had asked for, and we seek protection from all that the Prophet ﷺ had sought protection from. وصلى الله على النبي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.